The conference room smelled like stale coffee and bad decisions. I had been sitting in the same chair for 20 minutes when my husband finally walked in with his attorney. And the first thing he did, before he sat down, before he said good morning to the mediator, before he even set his briefcase on the table, was lean down close to my ear. "Be smart today, Cora," he said. His voice was low, the way it gets when he wants something to feel private but also wants the people nearby to know he's the one in charge. "Sign what I put in front of you. Take the clean exit. Or I drag this into a full trial and you end up starting over with nothing but your spreadsheets and your sad little savings account." He straightened up. He smoothed the front of his jacket. He took his seat across from me, like he was sitting down to a business lunch he'd already won. I looked at my hands folded in my lap. I thought about the binder inside the bag at my feet. The one I had spent 5 months assembling. 1,400 hours of lost sleep, 1 cracked phone screen, and approximately 60 trips to the library to print things I didn't want printed at home. I didn't say a word to him. I let him believe what he needed to believe. He was always very good at that, believing exactly what he wanted to. "My name is Cora. I'm 31 years old and I work as a financial analyst for an insurance company in Denver." I know what that sounds like. I know the picture it puts in your head. Sticky notes on a monitor, a reusable lunch container to a fridge, someone who gets to work 8 minutes early and never in their life has bounced a check. That's accurate. That has always been accurate. I am, as my husband once put it while I was color-coding our monthly budget on a Saturday morning, deeply and fundamentally boring. He didn't say it to be cruel. That was the thing. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Observational. Like it didn't occur to him that I might have feelings about it. "You know what your problem is?" he said, not looking up from his phone. "You're boring, babe." I kept working on the spreadsheet. I folded the comment down somewhere inside myself and kept going. That was what I did. I kept going. I had met my husband at a company happy hour 6.5 years earlier. He was in commercial real estate, which meant he had learned how to walk into a room and make it feel like the room had been waiting for him. He had the kind of easy confidence that looks like warmth until you've known it long enough to see the seams. He remembered everyone's name. He had a good handshake. He smiled at you like you were the most interesting thing he'd encountered all week, right up until he decided you weren't. I thought we were a good match. He was all spark and forward motion. I was all structure and follow through. He charmed people. I kept the lights on. I kept the lights on for 6 years. Every first of the month I paid the mortgage. I managed our joint checking account, our savings, the Roth IRA I'd talked him into opening in year 3. I tracked the car insurance, the HOA fees, the utility bills, the quarterly property tax. Every year I had our taxes filed before February was over and I did them myself, on TurboTax, because we didn't need an accountant when I was already doing the accountant's job for free. My husband loved this. He loved it the way you love something you've stopped seeing. Not with any real affection, just with the absence of complaint. He never asked what our savings balance was unless he wanted to buy something. New ski equipment, a weekend in Vegas with people from his office, a Tag Heuer watch he saw on a guy at a client dinner and couldn't stop thinking about. "Can we swing it?" he'd ask. I'd look at the numbers. I'd quietly move something around. Delay restocking the emergency fund, skip the contribution to the vacation account for a month, and I'd say yes because I wanted him to be happy, and because somewhere in the middle of the marriage I had confused keeping him happy with being loved. He'd kiss my cheek and be gone in 20 minutes. The end of my marriage arrived on a Tuesday evening in March, in the form of a Venmo notification on the shared family iPad. I was at the kitchen island making pasta. The iPad was propped up on the counter. We'd had a shared plan for years, everything linked. I reached past it to get to the Bluetooth speaker app, and the banner was just there, long enough to read before my brain caught up with my eyes. Miles paid Bianca $4,000 note for the deposit. I set down the wooden spoon. The notification disappeared by the time I picked up the iPad. He had his Venmo set to private. I realized, only then, that it had been set to private for months and I had never thought to notice. But the banner had been there, $4,000. Bianca, for the deposit. I finished making dinner. My husband came home at 7:30, kissed my cheek, said the traffic on I-25 was a nightmare. I asked about his day. He talked for 20 minutes about a commercial lease deal he was negotiating in Colorado Springs. I nodded. I refilled his water glass. I said the pasta came out good. Inside, I was completely, absolutely still, the way water gets quiet right before it turns to ice. After he fell asleep that night, I sat in the home office with the door shut and my laptop open. I logged into our joint checking account, the account I had managed for 6 years, whose every transaction I knew by rhythm and pattern, and I looked at it with new eyes. The pattern was there. I had explained it away, line by line, over months. ATM withdrawals and amounts just spaced out enough to seem ordinary. Transfers to a business checking account he'd told me was for client entertainment, reimbursable through work. I had nodded at that explanation and filed it somewhere I didn't look. I opened the Colorado Secretary of State Business Registry and searched his name. Harrington Property Ventures, LLC, filed 7 months ago, sole member. Business address, a month-to-month suite downtown. He had opened a company without telling me. I closed the laptop. I went back to bed. I listened to him breathe in the dark for a long time. The next morning, after he left for work, I called in sick and sat down at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a legal pad. I have a very methodical brain. It is not a dramatic brain. It does not spiral or catastrophize. When it encounters a problem, it makes a list. I started pulling threads. Over 3 weeks, I did not change a single visible thing about my life. I made dinner. I went to work. I asked him how his days were going. I let him believe I was exactly who he had always thought I was. Steady, predictable, not worth worrying about. Meanwhile, I built the case. I requested full transaction histories from every joint account going back 3 years. I printed everything at the library, not at home. I went through every line. Transfers to the LLC account totaling $31,000. Moved in careful increments. $800 here, $1,100 there, sometimes split into 2 separate transactions on consecutive days. The kind of pattern you only recognize if you're trained to look for it, or if you already know what you're looking for. Then I found the money market account. 2 years ago, my father passed away. He'd had a life insurance policy, $60,000, and he'd named me as his beneficiary. It was the most deliberate thing he ever did for me, and I know that because he wasn't a deliberate man. He was forgetful and a little scattered, and he showed love in sideways ways, making you breakfast without asking if you were hungry, fixing things around your apartment without mentioning he'd noticed they were broken. The policy was on purpose. He'd kept it current for 30 years on purpose. I put the money in a money market account. I told my husband it was there. I told him clearly in words that it was not to be touched. I told him it was the closest thing I had left to my father. The account balance was 0. Withdrawn 11 months ago, full amount, transferred to the LLC. From the LLC, it had gone to a down payment on a condominium at an address I didn't recognize, registered in my husband's name. I looked the address up on the Denver County Assessor's website. Then I looked up the utility accounts linked to the unit. There was Bianca's name. My father's money had paid for a home for a woman I had never met, a woman whose existence I only knew about because of a Venmo notification that had disappeared in 4 seconds. I sat in my car in the library parking lot for a long time after I found that. I didn't go back inside. I drove home. I made dinner. My husband asked what I made, and I said chicken and rice, and he said that sounded good. I smiled and said it was almost ready. I want to be honest about those weeks, because I think there is a story people tell about women in situations like mine. The story where strength means you don't fall apart, where being composed means being okay. That's not how it went. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor after he fell asleep and pressed my face into a towel because crying into a towel makes less sound than crying into a pillow. There were mornings I drove to work on autopilot and stood in the elevator for a full 60 seconds after reaching my floor because I couldn't make my legs move. There was one Thursday afternoon. I remember it was Thursday because I had a budget presentation at 2. When I sat in a bathroom stall at work and cried until my whole face swelled up and I had to run cold water over my wrists and stare at my reflection until I looked like someone who could give a budget presentation at 2. I was grieving the marriage. I was grieving the version of my life I thought I had. I was grieving my father's money in a way that felt different and darker than the rest of it, because it wasn't just money, and he knew that when he took it, and he took it anyway. But grief, I learned, can be made useful. You just have to let it make you precise. I found an attorney named Mr. Ashby through a referral from a colleague who had gone through her own divorce 2 years earlier. His office was on the second floor of an unremarkable building near the courthouse. No framed awards on the wall, no leather furniture to imply he was expensive. Just bookshelves, a clean desk, and wire-rimmed glasses that he adjusted whenever he found something interesting in a document. I put my file on his desk, printed bank records, LLC formation documents, property records, screenshots of Bianca's public Instagram account, where she had posted about her new apartment, the same address, the same unit, with captions about finally feeling settled. A photo of a welcome mat she'd bought from West Elm, which I recognized because I had bookmarked the exact same one for our own entryway 2 years ago, and then decided it was too expensive. Mr. Ashby read for a long time without speaking. "You assembled all of this yourself," he said. "I work in financial analysis." He looked at me over his glasses. "He's going to file a financial disclosure. Based on what I'm seeing here, it won't be complete." I know. When he misrepresents his assets to the court, we have him. But only if we wait until the disclosure is on record. You have to let him get comfortable first. He paused. "Can you do that?" I thought about the bathroom floor, the Thursday afternoon, the library parking lot. "Yes," I said. My husband filed 3 weeks later. He came home on a Tuesday, sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and told me he hadn't been happy for a long time. He said we wanted different things. He said I was a good person, but the marriage wasn't working. He did not mention Bianca. He did not mention the condo or the LLC or my father's money. He told me he wanted to be fair about the division of assets. Fair. I had to look down at the table so he wouldn't see what was happening on my face. "I want that too," I said. "I have a lawyer." He seemed briefly surprised, then relieved. "Good," he said. "That's smart. I think if we approach this like adults, we can keep it clean." He moved out the following weekend. He took his clothes, his watches, a good bottle of bourbon he'd been saving. He left behind all 6 years of the financial records I'd kept in the office filing cabinet. It didn't occur to him to take those. Mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in May. The conference room was on the 3rd floor of a downtown office building, gray carpet, fluorescent light, a window looking out at a parking structure. The mediator, Ms. Park, sat at the head of the table with the calm of someone who has witnessed a great many people realize they made mistakes. My husband arrived with his attorney, Mr. Crane, a man whose entire physical presentation was designed to communicate that he had won a lot of these, and he intended to win this one. He shook hands. He spread papers across the table. He exuded the confidence of someone who had not read the other side's file yet. Before Miss Park called the session to order, my husband leaned across the table toward me. Mr. Ashby was organizing his materials. My husband spoke quietly, the private but not really private register he used when he wanted an audience for something he was framing as just between us. "Be reasonable today, Cora," he said. "You're hurt, I understand that. But the house goes on the market and we split it clean. 60-40 because my income contribution was higher, which is just math. You walk away, you start fresh, no ugliness. Don't let your lawyer talk you into fighting over details. You'll end up with nothing." He leaned back. He looked the way he always looked it right before he closed a deal he was already certain about. I met his eyes. I didn't respond. Mr. Ashby looked up at me and gave the smallest nod. Mr. Crane presented my husband's position. Marital home to be sold, 60-40 split, no spousal support, and the LLC to be excluded entirely from marital assets because it had been established as an independent business entity. My husband's financial disclosure was already on record. It listed the house, the car, the 401(k), a checking account balance, a modest savings figure. No LLC, no condo, no $60,000 money market account. Ms. Park turned to our side of the table. Mr. Ashby stood. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. "Respondent's disclosure appears to be materially incomplete," he said. "We're submitting several items into the record." He passed copies across the table. Exhibit A. Joint account transaction records showing $31,000 transferred over 7 months to Harrington Property Ventures, LLC, an entity not disclosed in respondent's financial affidavit. My husband went very still. Exhibit B. Secretary of State formation documents for the LLC, sole member the respondent, established 7 months prior to our filing. Mr. Crane was reading. His face had done something careful and controlled that told me he was recalibrating everything he'd believed his client had told him. Exhibit C, Denver County property records showing a condominium purchased in respondent's name using the SLLC as the acquiring entity, also not disclosed in his affidavit. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system. Exhibit D. Mr. Ashby paused, just for a beat. Wire transfer records and money market account statements showing that $60,000, the proceeds of my client's father's life insurance policy, held as her separate property, were transferred without authorization into the LLC account and subsequently used as the down payment on this property. Miss Park set her pen down. She looked at my husband for a long moment. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "is the information in these exhibits accurate?" He started to speak, stopped. His attorney's hand came to rest on his arm, the gesture of a man who has just understood the shape of what he didn't know. My husband started again. "It was always my intention to repay that. It was a short-term use of funds, a bridge, I was going to." "You signed a sworn financial affidavit," Miss Park said. Her calm had a particular quality to it now, the quality of a very cold, very clear day. "These assets were not on it." I watched my husband's face while she spoke. I watched the confidence leave it, not all at once but in stages, like a structure that has lost its load-bearing wall. He looked at Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane was looking at the table. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in 6 years, maybe for the first time in longer than that, he actually looked at me, not past me, not through me, not at the part of me that was useful and quiet and easy to discount. He saw the binder on the table. He saw my face, which was calm because I had practiced being calm, because I had decided months ago that I was not going to give him the satisfaction of watching me shake. He looked at me and understood, all at once, that the woman he had spent 6 years calling boring had been sitting across from him at the dinner table for months, listening to him lie and making notes. I held his gaze. I did not smile, I did not say anything. I just let him sit in what he'd made. The mediation concluded 2 hours later. The condo would be sold, full proceeds remitted to me to restore the value of my father's money. The marital home, awarded to me, subject to refinance. The LLC would remain with my husband, but he would absorb the $31,000 in transferred funds as his sole liability, along with the credit card debt and personal loans he'd accumulated that I hadn't known about and wasn't responsible for. He left that room with a car, a portion of his retirement accounts, and somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 in debt. Mr. Crane shook my husband's hand on the way out. It was the handshake of someone who was done with this particular situation. My husband sat for a moment after everyone else had stood. I was putting on my jacket when he said my name. "Cora." His voice had changed. The salesman quality was gone. He just sounded tired. "I really thought you'd take the deals," he said. I didn't think you'd do this." "I know you didn't," I said. I picked up my bag. I thought about my father, briefly and clearly, the way I sometimes do, not with the full weight of grief, but with a quieter thing, something like gratitude for the person he was, even though he was gone too soon and didn't get to see any of this. "Good luck," I said. And I meant it, in the plain way you mean something when you're finished with it. Bianca was out of the condo within 3 weeks. I heard through someone who knew someone. She had apparently believed, for the better part of a year, that the apartment was a stable situation, that the man paying for it was building something real. When she found out the unit was being liquidated to restore a dead man's money to his daughter, she was gone before the listing went live. I won't pretend I didn't feel anything when I heard that. I felt something. Not quite satisfaction and not quite vindication. More like the quiet acknowledgement of a thing I had suspected for a long time. That it was never about love. It was about access, and when the access evaporated, so did she. My husband had exchanged 6 years of someone who would have done anything for him, who did do anything for him, who moved her grief around in quiet rooms to make space for his comfort, for a relationship that dissolved in 3 weeks when the money ran out. That was his arithmetic. He'd been running those numbers in his head for years without telling me, and the final answer was a condo that now belonged to someone else, and a debt load he'd be carrying for a long time. I sold the house 6 months later, not because I had to, because I wanted to. The rooms felt too large for one person, and I had spent enough of my life filling space that wasn't really mine. I bought a smaller place in a neighborhood I'd always liked, but always considered impractical, because it added 12 minutes to my commute. It has a porch with good morning light. On weekends, I sit out there with my coffee before the neighborhood wakes up, and I stay until I'm ready to move. Before I closed the accounts and filed the last paperwork away, I did one final thing. I opened a new spreadsheet. I typed in my assets. Savings restored, condo proceeds deposited, mortgage in my name, only my name, 401 nang, intact, emergency fund where it should be, vacation fund finally with nothing getting quietly redirected out of it. I looked at the numbers for a long time. They were good numbers. They were my numbers, built from the ground up, with nobody taking anything from the top. I closed the laptop. My father used to tell me that the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor. I used to think that was just something you say to a quiet kid who gets passed over. Now I understand what he meant. When someone decides you're not worth their full attention, they stop watching. They stop covering their tracks. They leave doors open that they would have locked if they'd taken you seriously. My husband had 6 years to take me seriously. He spent them looking somewhere else. And in the end, all that looking away cost him everything, and gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost. The version of myself that had nothing left to prove, and nowhere left to be small.